Arthur, welcome to this artist talk, and thanks for talking. I mean, you had a great speech last night during the opening, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity to look at a couple of works, you know. But we are here in this first room, which is a great introduction into your work, because there are already here rather crucial works, you know, with this work, Mel, a very special title, and this work is from 2002. It was made in Rome during a residency at the American Art Academy. Then we have a big pinboard presentation of works on paper. The oldest work being here in the middle, Saturn. And Saturn is like a work, I think it's 1989, 90?
Yeah.
On a torn sheet of paper, but that's kind of the epicenter of this wall, with many more works that are later. Then we have a small dream catcher, also a recurring motif. And the seventh dream catcher is over there, hovering above the door at the entrance. That's a brand new dream catcher, number 7 that he did. The very first one he did for the Jamaican Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Actually, Arthur approached the Biennale and said, I would like to represent Jamaica. And he also went to the government, and he pulled it through and realized the one and only Jamaican participation in the Venice Biennale in 2001. And that's when the very first dream catcher was made. And just as a last input, we have a beautiful rope piece that also has become a steady vocabulary, a formulation, actually an articulation, a vocabulary in your work. And I like this one particularly because it still contains a canvas. You started off as a painter, and maybe in the spirit of Robert Rauschenberg with his combined paintings, where he brought objects to the surface of the painting, you tried to bring objects to the canvas as well, and you tried to bring it together in a special way, but the result was that you ended up working with hemp rope. So just a little overview, and I mean, you know the work so much better than I do, but maybe we start with this Mel work.
Yeah. Well, Mel is my nickname. If you know any Jamaicans, most Jamaicans have 2 names. They have their formal name, which is mine, which is Arthur, and then they have their family name that everybody calls them, including their cousins, and mine is Mel, right? And the reason why I got that nickname, it was after the sprinter in Jamaica. Jamaica is known for many things, and one of the things, main things that it's known for are the runners, right? Who's the fastest man in the world? Who has the record? Where is he from, right? It's Jamaica, Usain Bolt, right? So the tradition goes back for many decades. And there were these 2 twin brothers, Mel and Mal, who became national heroes, and they won medals in the Olympics in the 1950s. So I was named after Mel, M-E-L-L. And when I was in Rome, you know, which was very impactful for me. I was, like Gianni said, I was at the American Academy in Rome. I won the Rome Prize. And Lucy Fradkin, my wife, was there with me, the great painter Lucy Fradkin. And it was very impactful living in that culture, looking at the great art, looking at Caravaggio, whose work was very impactful on me. And I created this portrait of myself. And the interesting thing about this piece is I didn't use any nails or screws to help to bind it together. It's probably the only piece that I made that's bound together only by pressure, right? And as I look at this piece, you know, one thing about my work, you know, and I tell art handlers that move it sometimes, is like, don't just grab my piece, because if you do, you might get cut, you know? And as I'm looking at it now, if you go up close, you see all these things, these are staples that are sticking out. So if you would grab it, it would grab back and it would cut you. So there's that aspect of danger that permeates through my work, actually. So.
You mentioned Caravaggio, which brings us to this presentation of works on paper with several works from the Black Caravaggio series. So you see examples here. So part of it is actually, it's hard to believe, but it's made on white paper. So you really kind of obsessively darken this white paper with 2 different shades of charcoal, with graphite, and applying your hair.
Yes.
And actually it's an invention that goes back to those years in Rome.
Yes.
And it would be great to hear more about Caravaggio, this kind of almost obsession with Caravaggio, and with the bringing in of your hair as a personal relic.
Right. Well, lots of cultures, if you study history, world history, art history, there are lots of cultures throughout the world that use hair in the work. And, Asian cultures and African cultures is where I got the use of the hair. I first started in the mid-1980s, and back then I would go to barbershops and get other people's hair, and it didn't work for me, right? So when I go to Rome, Lucy and I live in Rome for a year, and I started doing these drawings. This one is in Dublin, by the way, it's not Rome. This was done in 2008. I was doing these drawings that are based on these drawings that I started in the late 80s, early 90s, and I started including postcards of the great Baroque artist Caravaggio, right? Very inspired by him, His use of light, the figures, the gesture, the drama of it really inspired me. So I was using that as an indication of the location where I was at, indigenous art from the Baroque in Rome and Italy. And then I needed an identifier to say, oh, this is me, the Jamaican, the African American, the African diasporan. And that's when I started using my hair. And then it just worked for me. Yeah, I was just a little aside. I was going to tell a story about when I decided to use my hair. I had to go to a barber in Rome. So, at the academy, they recommend, places to go. They recommend this barber. You walk up the Janicolo up the hill. And I said, Lucy, you come with me, because her Italian was better than mine. Still better than mine. So we go to this guy, right? And we go in, guys, look. And I sit down in the chair. And the guy's never cut black hair before. So he's trying this, he's trying that, and he's kind of freaking out. And then he tried one, oh yeah, that one works. And then he starts cutting, and he's talking to me in Italian, and Lucy's listening. I say something to Lucy, she say it to him. And then, Lucy would go back to me every time, when I went to get my hair cut. At a certain point, she stopped going, and I would go by myself. And when I come into the door, he's like, oh, Arthur, he was really happy. At the end of the residency, I did a black Caravaggio drawing with my hair and gave it to him. He was beside himself. He put it in a special place in the barbershop. So this piece is probably the second oldest piece in the exhibition. The first oldest piece is I See Manchester, Portrait of My Parents. That's in the back. So this piece was started in 1989 and finished in 1992. And like Gianni was saying, there's a canvas in here because I started doing these pieces that were more wall reliefs, right? Where I'd have a canvas and I'd put all these various objects on them, but they look so different that I needed some kind of a unifying agent, right? I first started with paint, right? And that didn't work. So then thinking back, reflecting back on my days as a student, I would go to the Museum of Modern Art, one of the great museums of the world. And there I remembered seeing this object that was created by the great post-minimalist sculptor, Jackie Windsor, right? It's this piece called Bound Square. It's 4 logs, on each corner. There's rope. It just leans against the wall. And it was a little taller than me. And I always asked myself, is that really art? What is it? What is she trying to do? But it left an indelible impression on me. So I decided, okay, let me try rope, right? And the first rope that I tried was hemp rope. And hemp is a cultural object from Jamaica, hemp, ganja, marijuana, right? So a lot of my work deals with cultural objects that I studied, or places that I've gone to, things that people give me. All right.
If you can say more about, the quality of the rope and also like how you set titles. I mean, this work is called Lucy Fredkin meets John de Lapa or Gregor, which is quite a complex title.
Yeah, it's complicated. When I was working on this piece, I got connected with this dealer, Philippe Briette, in New York. This crazy Frenchman, right? But he loved art, and he had this space at 558 Broadway on the second floor. Pamela Auchincloss had a gallery on that same floor too. But as I was working on this piece in Williamsburg, it was on the floor, and Philippe would come and he kept pestering me. What's the title for this piece, Arthur? I need to know the title. I said, leave me alone, man, I'm working. What's the title? Give me the title, give me the title. Leave me alone. I need a title, Arthur, give me a title. So Lucy Fredkin meets John de Lapa. Lucy Fredkin is my wife, and John de Lapa is one of my good friends, right? So, okay, he leaves me alone, he goes, and I continue to work on the piece. It's on the ground, and a lot of times I put glue or polymer on the surface of my piece to sometimes give it, a sort of a tone, and it helps to kind of bind the pieces together. And as I was doing it on the floor, it started to look like this giant insect, right? It started to look like a giant roach. And it reminded me of when I was reading, as a student, The Metamorphoses by Kafka. So it reminded me of Gregor. So that's when I added or Gregor to the title, because oftentimes the word kind of gives me the title. Sometimes, like the title for the show, Chair with My Hair, I have the title and then I have to make the piece. So artist works in different ways sometimes. Right?
So do you remember what's all in there? I mean, it's like a time capsule almost.
Yeah.
From 30 years ago, over 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's about concealment also, which is very African, and in African cultures, they sometimes you'd have what's called a power figure, or an Nkondi and Kisi figure, the figures that you all know with the nails and all the various objects that are stuck in to ward off evil, to help people survive in their environment, which is usually made by two people. The craftsman would make it, and then they would give it to the shaman that would give it its power and put the items inside. So I think about that too, or one of the things that I think about when I make my work. So there are various objects in there, and some of them you can see, like this orange thing over here that they put on the street to identify if there's a hole, so you go around it. And it's also light reflective. Light plays an important part in my work. So if you turn off all the lights in the room and it's really dark and you shine a light on that, you'll get like this orange light that comes out at you, right? So it's concealment that sometimes it shows itself when it's in the right environment.
Maybe just quickly about objets trouvés, found objects, and surrealism, and I mean, and maybe also ecology in a certain sense, because you upcycled all kind of things that would have been probably discarded forever,
right?
And you gave them, in some way, eternal life, because they become art and they get protected and preserved.
Yeah, there's so many things that we use and we discard as people. I mean, one of the biggest masses in the world is in the Pacific Ocean. There's just this mass of garbage, right? And so I like to use what's in our environment to create, my form, my idea, right? And it's never really random with me. I choose things for a specific reason, like that green up there is chosen, because I like the way it looks next to the wood, next to the reflection there, and next to the rope, right? So it's always a particular reason why I choose things, So there's so much, an analogy I gave yesterday is, a painter would go to an art supply store and they would buy green paint, pink paint, purple paint. Well, my paint is objects, right? People send me objects in the mail sometimes. We went to a store here to buy me some secondhand rope, which is still good rope, right? It's just that, maybe it had a little knot in it that somebody didn't like, right? So my paint are the objects that I use and find and that people give me, And there's also another side about concealment. I remember in the 1980s, I had this poncho that I really loved. Clint Eastwood, that guy with his westerns and, stupid westerns, and he's wearing this poncho, right? So I got this poncho, it's really nice. And for many years, I couldn't figure out what I did with it, right? And then one day, this sculpture that's still in my studio, I really peeped inside of it. It's like, there's that poncho in there, right? So sometimes I put things in there, right? And then it just disappears, and I forget about it, right? We forget sometimes. You look in your sculpture, it's right there.
You also said that you used to have a cat that slept in the sculpture of your parents, the portrait of your parents. Yeah. That was the favorite nap place.
That was the favorite nap place. We all, have pets sometimes, and sometimes they walk in your artwork or they sleep inside your artwork, and she looked really comfortable there, so I just let her sleep in it,
Should we move on to La Barca?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
La Barca is a boat.
It's a boat.
So is it the first boat in your work?
Well, that's a good question, because if you look at, a lot of the pieces in the room, they look like vessels. So it might be the first boat, but it's not the first vessel that I've created. I made this, like Gianni was saying, for the show that I had in this church last year around this time, this decommissioned 17th century Italian church that had its beginnings in the 11th century. And it was not that dissimilar from this space, in that it really was an unusual space for contemporary artists to put, sculptures, contemporary sculptures on the floor and on the walls of this church, right? And it had 60-foot ceilings, right? So it was quite a challenge. It was quite a challenge. And one of the things that the owner of the church, Lorenzo, who was at the opening last night, and Jose Martos, one of my dealers in New York, they wanted me, and me too, wanted to create a boat. So we would go out to look for boats, boats that washed up. And the thing about the boats that were washing up, they belong to people, right? So you'd have to buy them, but it'd have to be the right boat that's not too heavy. At one point, I said, you know what? I'm just going to make my own boat. So I just made my own boat. And as you look at it, it's a chair, right? Part of my chair piece is like chair with my hair. There are stones placed in a particular spot. Every time this is installed, each one of these stones gets placed in that same spot. It's nothing is random, really. Or if something is random and I notice it, then either I say yes or say no. That's the thing about art that I say to my students all the time. It's all about making decisions, right? You can do something and not think about it, and it's random. You totally don't expect it, but then when you realize it, it's up to you as the artist to say, okay, I'm going to leave it or I'm going to take it out. It's like Hans Art, right? He used to drop all the paper down. It was like, oh, he's just dropping paper down. Yeah, but then at a certain point, he said, oh, I like this one. So he leaves it, right? So it's random, but then after you come to realization, then, it is what it is, right? So it has lots of drawings, has the sail. I do lots of drawings. It has a cross in it, this Christian country, right? And has the drawing on the floor, right? So this drawing is different than these drawings, right? So.
And maybe you could say more, about this cross and Christian seafarer and migration and...
Yeah. Boats, they take, people, cargo from this point to that point. It speaks of the great the passage when the Africans came. They don't want to come. They were stolen and brought to the U.S. and various other locations. It's about me leaving Jamaica as a little child and going to the U.S., to New York in particular, reuniting with my mom, who had come 3 years earlier. I mean, it's kind of a sad story, but with a happy ending in that My parents decided that because Jamaica was going through these, these political times, tough political times, and the then prime minister was leaning towards Cuba. And if you're in the sphere of the U.S. and you lean towards Cuba, what'll happen, right? They try to assassinate the prime minister, and they pull all their funds out, right? So a lot of Jamaicans left because things were really so hard. They went to Canada, the U.S., and England. Right? My family went to the U.S., but my father kind of pushed my mom to come before us. I was 3.5 years old, so she left. And for 3 years, I only saw one time, so it was really impactful on the family. And on me in particular, I was really close to my mom, right? Yeah, and this exhibition was a collaboration between me and Gianni, Lucy, Oliver, and other people that were here, Lorenz, right? So initially I had the I.C. Manchester piece over here, right? Wasn't too sure about it, and then Gianni said, well, why don't you try the boat here, right? And I said, I don't know about that. We put the boat here, and it worked, right? And this chair faces that chair, and it also brings the articulation of the space itself because it's between the railroads, right? So it's not only me, Gianni, and everybody else that I mentioned, it's also the space, and that's the great thing about this space. It's so unconventional, right? And I just want to show you this. Nothing is random, right? So all the pieces, I'm just going to pick this up. They have a number, right? And there's a map. So whenever you install it, there's a map where everything is placed. And at first, I did the installation, and then my wife, Lucy, said, doesn't look right, right? So then I said, okay, you do it then. And she did a better job than me. And that's why it looks like that.
Should we step over to electric chair?
Okay.
So this is another chair piece. As you said, there are many chair pieces, and there are many knife pieces. There are many pieces where you use knives. This is kind of a combination between the two.
And this, like Gianni was saying, this is a combination of my chair series and my knife series, right? This is one of them. And it's very rare when I bring two series together like that, but I don't know if I can actually say it's rare because it's an ongoing process, me being an artist, right? So it might be rare now, but maybe 3 years from now, it won't be so rare, right? And it's basically a torture device. Electric chair, those are real knives, those are real axe, and they will maim you if you touch it wrong. And it was inspired really by Andy Warhol's paintings of electric chairs, right, that he did in the 1960s, right? So it's, it speaks to torture, basically. And the knives, again, it goes back to when I worked as an art handler in the Brooklyn Museum, and I was moving the collection around, and I encountered these African throwing knives, which were beautiful objects, but what they used to do to maim, right? So there's that aspect of danger in some of my work, which, comes from looking at Richard Serra's work, the aspect of danger. Will it fall on you? It could fall on you. And some of my pieces are similar, that they're off balance. They have that contrapposto, counterpoise, counterbalance, that if you push it rightly or incorrectly, it will fall. So, yeah, and this piece is from around 1995, 1996. The interesting thing about this show, it spans like 35, 36 years, so it's important for me to see the work, right, to see them together, and some of them I don't own anymore, so it might be the last time that I see them, so it's a really important show for me.
Yep. For me, it's really sculptures on the move, because you always kind of articulate movement, the sliding of the snowboard, the rolling of the wheel, the driving of the car, and the turning of the earth, and you have like all these movements that are organized in this little cross system.
Yeah. Again, it's a cross, just like on the La Barca. I mean, a cross is a loaded symbol, right? It has this religious connotation, and sometimes I'm afraid to kind of use it, but then, it's like, that's what I do. So I just do it anyway, but I try to be respectful, is what I say. And if you look at that red shoes, and you look at what Lucy's wearing, that's where it comes from. It's her shoes, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing about this piece, these two wheels, they come from a piece that was, I created at the Rockefeller Foundation in Bellagio, Italy in 2000. Then it went to a show on the Lido in Venice. And then it was in the Jamaica Pavilion in the Venice Biennial in 2001. When that show was over, they sent it back in this crate that was the size of a small apartment, right? And I had nowhere to put it. So luckily I have some good friends. Arthur, you could put it in my yard. So I put it in a yard in rural New Jersey, and it's been there ever since, right? So we went to see it. Lucy and I went to see it recently in the summer, and the piece had sunk into the ground, right? But I was able to salvage two wheels from it to include in something. I included in this piece, and it's one of my dream catcher pieces. Yeah, and the snowboards were given to me by friends. They actually use these snowboards. We were in Aspen, which is very similar to the landscape of Switzerland. We were in Aspen this past summer, and people give me things. So my friends gave me all these snowboards, which these are two of them. The other one is back there. And another friend in Vermont gave me these toy trains. And then this globe in the center we got when we were in Maine. So the objects themselves come from different states, right? New Jersey, Colorado, Maine, and Vermont. So the whole thing is about travel. And even where I got this, the various items are from, is about travel, essentially.
So it seems to be incredibly well-rooted, this piece, compared to your other sculpture, because it's so heavy. It's probably one of the heavier sculptures that you made. But maybe you can tell a little bit more about the process of the making and how your vision came about.
Yeah. Well, the making of this piece actually started in September when Gianni first invited Lucy and I to come to St. Gallen. He organized these trips that we would go with Lorenz and with Oliver. And one of them was to a rope factory, and one of them was to a recycling plant. And in this recycling plant, there are these stacks of crushed cans and crushed plastic bottles. I was drawn to the crushed cans. They were just amazing objects. Look at the speckle of color that comes off of them. And they also have a lot of Coca-Cola bottle in them, right? And my dad worked for Coca-Cola the last year that we were in Jamaica. And then when we went to New York, to Brooklyn, he got a job in a factory working for a Coca-Cola plant. And that's what sustained the family, until he retired. So it's a cultural object. It's a personal object for me. Yeah, and so when we came back in this incarnation, we go back, Oliver and I go back to the same plant, because we said, oh, we're going to get one of them. But when we went back, they had, these stacks, but they were bigger and heavier. This one alone weighs over 300 pounds. I don't know how many kilometers that is. And that one alone weighs over 300 pounds.
150 kilos.
150 kilos, 150 kilos over. So the ones that were there were twice the size, right? So we said, okay, can you make two custom made for us, right? So that's what they did. They made these two custom made for us, for me, right? So, yeah, Giacometti is a major influence on me also. Like I said, I look to history, many histories, world history, art history, cultural history, to draw from, to glean from, to help to form my idea. And Giacometti's, squares where you have figures, where you have body parts, it's very instrumental in me placing, this black hand and those two left feet that somebody pointed out to me, that Shala pointed, they're two left feet. But I've done a lot of works about my left foot in particular, because there's a screw in my foot. There's a long story about my left foot. We don't have to get into that, But also, when they brought both of these here, they were on these pallets. And I like that, right? The pallet acts as a base, it picks it up off the floor, air can go through it, so it makes it seem lighter than it actually is, right? It's also about John Chamberlain, his crushed metal pieces, crushed car pieces. He was one of my teachers when I was in this residency in Maine in 1985. So it's about many things that come together to create this one piece, and it is one piece, right? And the name for the show came about before I ever did any of this, right? So it was a challenge for me to come up with something because I had the name but not the work yet. Right?
Maybe you can say something more about the base of this work, which is very articulated. You have these big kind of wooden beams, and then attached with wire, the sleigh, the Davoser Schlitten, and then you have a little kind of in-between wood frame that is screwed to the sleigh, and then you have this typical Swiss school chair that is bound with rope to it. And I mean, it doesn't look like a safe place to me. I wouldn't want to to sit on it. Of course, it's not made to sit on it, but it's kind of also a precarious kind of equilibrium.
Yeah, it's a precarious balance, which I like. I like to throw people kind of off balance, And again, in September, we identified the chair, the sleigh, and the beams. Lorenz took Lucy and I, throughout, in the attic of the museum where they had all this stuff, and I saw that. I said, yeah, I have to use that. Actually, I identified 3 chairs, right? So if I were here long enough, there'd be either another sculpture or 2 more sculptures with chairs, right? But I was drawn to it. There's certain things that I'm drawn to for a particular reason. So I was drawn to those items, not knowing what I would do with them, right? Because I improvise as I go along. So when I got these slabs, actually I did this first, and then the slabs came in. So I knew I wanted to create a procession, just like a couple of days ago, the festival was going through. So it's like a procession that's like this. It's reminiscent of Egyptian sculpture where you have the pharaoh and the queen sitting here in this big chair. It's reminiscent of the Greek kuros that kind of stands like this. There are many of them. There's a great one in the Museum of the Metropolitan, right? And it goes along the railway, right? We're staying by the railway. The railroad used to come in here. So I'm using, again, the structure of the building to help to articulate this piece. And lastly, these cluster of stones is reminiscent of when we were in Dublin at a residency at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And the great English sculptor, Richard Long, had a major presence there, and he left all these clusters of rocks throughout the landscape of Dublin, which I saw, which had an impact on me also.
But you also claim, in a certain sense, claim this chair for yourself. Yeah. It's the chair with my hair, and nobody would dare to sit on your hair, Yeah, this chair is kind of occupied now by your...
That's right.
By the substitute of your body through this hair.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it's a chair that's supposed to be sat on with my chair. My hair is what's sitting on the chair, right? So there's that tension, right? Should I touch the hair? Am I supposed to touch the hair? Am I supposed to sit on that hair? So there's that tension sometimes that it articulates, which I like. I like tension, throwing things off balance, throwing people off balance with my work.
I have a question. I was wondering about the sort of fetishistic nature of the hair that you're using, because I also associate it a little bit with afterlife, because it's the thing that keeps growing even after we are dead. Yeah. And including the nails that you have, nail clippings. Yeah. And I was wondering if that also relates to these stone piles that to me are sort of new in your work. Yeah. Is there a relationship to the earth and maybe also, passing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Tom. And yeah, I think about that. I think about me passing. I think about my legacy. And it does come out in my work, Oftentimes, like I say, with that feather piece that you're standing right next to, I mean, it's very fragile. You could just bend it, right? So, I mean, we're here, we have a time frame where we're here and then we're not here anymore in body. So there's a spirituality in my work that sometimes it doesn't come out, but then some people will see it, you know. I think about that. I don't have a religion per se, but I believe in spirituality, I believe in people, I believe in my ancestors. And those are some of the things that I think about all the time when I do my work. You know, I like to say my work is multi-layered, right? It has many facets to it that come together to create my idea, and that's one of them, the spirituality of the work itself, yeah. So, and the funerary aspect also shows in that piece, Shark and Il Santo del Mare, because those clusters, these two pieces I made when I was in Cremona last year, and we would walk around the town and we'd go to cemeteries, and in the cemeteries, there would be these clusters of stones as a memorial to, you know, whomever had passed away. So it really shows, you know, in those pieces. Yeah.
And you also mentioned the Jewish aspect with the stone.
Right. The Jewish aspect. When Lucy's grandmother passed away in 1997, then a year later, we dedicate the tombstone. And rather than putting flowers like you do in a Christian tradition, you use stones, right? And that, you know, left something in my mind, a cultural aspect, right? So, yeah.
Is there anyone pulling that sleigh?
No, it's just the pressure of the stones just holding it, you know. Certain times if things aren't bound down, then there's pressure just keeping it where it is, right? So if I would move the stones, the cord would just fall like that, you know, just like there's pressure that's holding up that piece. You know, nothing is screwed in, it's just the pressure holding that up. If you would take those stones away, or even if you just take the bamboo away, the whole thing will just, you know, it probably won't fall too much because the stones are kind of holding it. But a combination of taking the bamboo away and the stones, the whole thing will just crash to the ground. And the same thing with this piece over here. Right?
Arthur, thank you so much. Thank you very much for listening. Vielen Dank für Ihr Interesse und für das Zuhören. Und ich wünsche Ihnen ein tolles Wochenende.